My name is Dr. Rosemary Rebuli, and I'm the Global Head of Trial Management for Novartis. And I'm just thrilled to be here today and to introduce you to our panel, who are very much looking forward to discussing the adventures and opportunities and also some of the challenges they've encountered in their daily work lives working with AI. So I'm pleased to introduce you to Dr. Bart Geerts. Dr. Bart Geerts is a consultant cardiac anaesthetist and founder of the startup Healthplus.ai. Dr. Indra Joshi, she is the digital health and AI clinical lead for NHS England. And Dr. Navin Ramachandran, who is a practicing radiology consultant and healthcare researcher. So welcome to our panel. So I thought we'd start today actually with Bart here on my left. Bart has a story which was actually very interesting for me, having once been a practicing clinician and maybe dreamed about starting a startup, but never actually doing it. And Bart's done it. So Bart, over to you.
All right, thank you. So as for the why, I've been a clinician for some time. I also did a bit of research, so helping 11 PhDs, getting grants and all that, and publishing more than 50 papers. But ultimately, after 15 years, I started looking back, so what did my PhD actually achieve? And then asking around, looking around, you can see that there was only a limited number of people actually using anything worthwhile from that research. So that for me was a reason to say, okay, I want to have a bit more impact. Now I'm treating 2 patients a day. I'm still part-time doing anesthesia lists. But I only get to help maybe 1 or 2 patients. So for me, this was a really good incentive to go out there and make something that other people can use and implement basically straight away. Now, that's easier said than done, of course. So we started off by looking at one of the issues I encountered even working at UCH as an ICU fellow. We had a lot of patients have to go through sepsis. And sepsis, of course, is a life-threatening disease. It starts with an infection, starts really small, and it progresses. And we tend to miss a number of patients where we don't see the early small details, small changes going on when it progresses, and then ultimately, after 5 days, we find out and they need to go to ICU. So that, for me, was a good case to start and see, together with the Leiden University Medical Center, whether we could build a model that could predict infections before the team normally spots them. So we did a proof of concept study, and we found that we could build a model that, although we didn't even include all data, that we could find about 80% accurately could find infections 4.5 to 5 days before clinicians spotted them. Am I saying now, to tap into the previous discussion as well, are we replacing doctors? For me, not at all. I was looking forward to build a tool, and we're now expanding that, going further with LUMC and 3 other hospitals in building a tool that you can apply right now, but also you can add your own actions, so the clinicians can add actions based on these assessments, but you get this closed loop. So that was one important step. And of course, the other is, it buys you time to do this. It's all about time, getting there in time before the disease progresses. And now we've also looked at some other cases, all tapping into this surgical pathway, where we see there's a lot of variability going on in between patients, but even within physicians. And we're trying to be an aid in that process, in providing more standardized care, personal care, for whatever that means. I think we can discuss about that a bit too. But also giving the tools to do it early and be a doctor again.
And how have you found that's been accepted by the clinicians?
I think actually better and better. So as an academic, I've also worked on some early AI tools. One tool was from Edwards Life Science. I think there's actually someone in the room from that company. We got to work on a tool that's now actually FDA approved, CE marked, so it's actually now being used, which gives me a good feeling, maybe not as much as a researcher, but more as a clinician, that it has the ability to create impact at scale. And we went through this whole cycle. So we went from just a model, or not even that, to validating it. And I actually saw that our anesthesia nurses and my colleagues, even the more cynical ones, started using it while not having written one paper. I'm not saying we have to do without papers, not at all. We need this validation process. But what I did see was that they were seeing, because of this short loop, we're predicting low blood pressure in theater. And actually they get this signal, they get a chance to act early. But of course, if you're cynical, you reject, you ignore. But you can only do that up to a certain point where you think, oh, this thing is actually right most of the time. Right. So there I actually see that it's changing behavior on that level without having even the complete body of evidence that we need.
Right. Thank you very much. Thank you. So Navin, maybe we move to you, because I think you have a slightly different view, maybe a slightly different experience.
Yeah, I'm going to come in from a more controversial opening statement, and that's, if you speak to most clinicians, their comment will be something akin to, AI is super hype, change my mind. And I think everyone in this room is together on the same kind of journey. They can see the potential, but actually out there, most people on the ground don't really know what's going on and don't really like it. So what they're dealing with is old EHR systems, if they have an EHR system that just about works. If they try and get data out of it or try and add a new thing in, it's incredibly hard. If they put an AI on top of it, so within radiology, you'll have computer-aided diagnosis, CAD, or decision support. What tends to happen is because the liability still lies with us as a clinician, because that's, well, economically, it doesn't make sense not for it to lie with us. So we have to do our own standard check. Then we have to go and check the decision support, check what it said, and then probably you've ended up spending about 60% more time doing your work. So the value proposition for the clinician is not great. So that's the target audience you're going to be dealing with. But actually, as a clinician myself, for the last few years, I've been getting more into med tech, and we've been doing a lot more stuff that's rolled in AI, either for surgical planning, voice recognition, a few more meaningful things, chatbots, things like that. And I can see the potential, and I think the only way we achieve that is to go from the current institution-centric model, which basically says every hospital or general practice owns its own data, has its own locked-in vendors that control the data, and is controlled by the institution, to one that the patient controls. And actually, suddenly, data has to move between everywhere. And that means the data has to become interoperable, and it makes sense. Because what I'm seeing here is all AI gets lumped together into one pot. So AI is magical, but actually AI is a whole different bunch of things. And there's more straightforward algorithms that say, if this and this happen, then do this. And that I can buy. Things that are verifiable, I can buy very easily. So things like my voice recognition that uses AI, I can buy that. Is there surgical pre-planning where I can go and check it matches the images, and it's just taken over some menial task? That's good. But what we're about to get to is the next stage, where we give up some of our decision-making responsibility to an all-knowing power, which is the AI. And if that's the case, then I want to be very sure that the data that's feeding it is right. And anyone who's been in there now, so we're trying to do this at UCL, and we've got a collaboration with the Alan Turing Institute around the corner from us, looking at machine learning. But when you try and take data out of your system, so in the last talk we had this thing of a big, giant, big data store which takes everything in. That's great in theory. It's a mess in there. So these things are called data lakes. And it's called a data lake because everything ends up there and mixes together, and it's very hard to take out. And that's great if you're putting a deep learning mechanism on it, which kind of looks through all this, the jumble, and tries to find any kind of signal in it, and tries to find some association. As soon as you start doing semantic work, so you're trying to get something understandable out of it, it all starts going wrong.
And I think, sounds like we're having a few technical issues, but Navin, that now actually helps me, because that makes sense a little bit. I looked on the Open Cancer and Peach site, and I noticed you had a comment there on your view on the collection of data needs to be a consequence of the delivery of care.
Yeah.
So being able to put it in first time right, and have that go into the data lake, if that's the way we go.
So that's how I got into this in the start, because typically in hospitals you have operational systems and research systems. So you have, in the course of my job, I'll put data into my lab thing, my order requests, into my clinical notes. But actually, most people doing pathway management, doing research, have other databases where they put in extra data. And because the data is so badly coded in the first instance, they recode it there, and you end up with a big jumble of stuff. So I think the longer-term view is, if you now have the opportunity to go patient-centric and community-wide, we're going to be building new systems, and those systems should be built properly and with semantic interoperability, which means you can actually make sense of it. Yeah. But there's a lot more issues around AI, which we'll probably touch on.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Navin. So I think this is a perfect segue, actually, to yourself, Indra, very much around NHS, community, patient, needs to be for the patient. So over to you.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for the invite. And thank you, Navin, for your controversial slap it down before it's even started. So I cannot see the audience because the lights are brilliantly bright here, but I wanted to just share some of the things that we've done recently in England, in the UK, around this topic. So I'll say about 3 things, because otherwise we won't have much time for discussion. One thing is, what is AI? You know, we all talk about it, and in this room I think there are a lot of experts, but there is a general public, there are clinicians, but let's talk about a workforce out there that don't actually understand this terminology. They don't know what this means. And one of the things we decided to do was write a report, because A, we didn't want to miss out on the party of writing reports. Everybody loves a report. So we, Department of Health, the NHS, but also with our academic health and science networks, wrote a report on accelerating AI in health and care. So do go and have a look at it, Google it. It's on the Kent, Sussex, Surrey AHSN website. We love acronyms in the UK, as you know. But we tried to define what is AI, and we tried to define it in a way that was very simple, understandable, so those people in the workforce could understand what it meant to them. So all this scaremongering, all this big data, analytics, machine learning, what does that mean? This is where we've tried to say, this is what it means. And it goes hand in hand with another thing we're doing with the American physician Eric Topol, is to say, how do we retrain our workforce so it is actually capable of dealing with these new technologies? The second thing, lots of speakers have spoken about it earlier, was what are the rules in this game? What are we doing? You talk about we don't believe it, it's going to cause more problems, and we talk about data ethics. So we've released something called a Code of Conduct for Data-Driven Technologies. Do go and have a look. It's up there on our departmentofhealth.gov.uk site. And again, it's a set of 10 principles. They're not new, they're not groundbreaking, but it's trying to put something out there for communities, for clinicians, for those people who are developing these technologies to say, well, what are the rules? What are the standards that I should be following when I'm doing this? And again, we're not trying to say what we're doing is brilliant. It may even be not that good. But what we're trying to say is let's all say the same thing so that when you want to do big data analytics, we all understand that there are common data standards. There are evidence standards. There's transparency. There's accountability in all of this. And I think these are really slightly boring, but fundamentals that we need to get out there. So I'll stop there. Those are my 3 things I wanted to share with what we're doing, but also do go and have a look. I'm really wanting to work collaboratively on it.
When you look, Indra, at everything you've seen in this role, where do you think the greatest opportunity lies for AI in healthcare? I saw one interview, and I think you were speaking about, it was in a specific context, you were speaking about a bot, I think it was, in helping, I think it was autistic kids. I'm not entirely sure if I have that right. And that was some time ago. What are your feelings now?
I mean, I would go back to Navin's point. Hands up. Like I said, I really can't see anything, so it's probably pointless asking you to put your hands up. But hands up here, those of you who are frontline clinicians or work in a hospital or some kind of healthcare setting. And everybody from Novartis, put your hands up. No. Okay, so there's a few of you out there. We have some fundamental problems. A, there's nobody there in a hospital. We don't have enough staff. The staff who are there are burnt out. They hate it. It's horrible for them. So some of the good things we've seen up in the north in a couple of our hospitals, but also in London, and I know UCL is a good one, so I won't talk about it. I'll let Navin talk about it. But some of the staffing issues, improving workflow, improving bed management. Simple stuff. It's not cool, it's not clinical trials, but it is simple stuff. That means people get out of hospital better, they get treated in the right place, and we've seen some bottom-up approaches do some really good stuff.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Am I allowed to say one more thing?
Sure.
For danger of being quite chatty. The other thing is bringing, and I questioned Bertrand earlier, but is bringing citizens along with this journey. It is imperative, is all I can say, that this isn't a them and us. Let's change the biomedical paradigm. Let's put the power into their hands, into our hands. We're all citizens. We've all fallen ill. We've all experienced pain. You know, change the paradigm is all I would say.
Thank you so much, Indra. So I think that's actually a very good opportunity to bring the stage lights down and up the house lights, as we say, and open it for some Q&A. So if you have a question, you may not just raise your hand, you can jump and shout and stuff so I can see you. There you go, great. Gentleman in the front.
John Reisman, OSS Foundation again. And I just wanted to bring up a point about Navin's slapping down. I think it's a great idea because I remember Ronald Reagan said trust but verify, in this case with human lives at risk. Verification is pretty important. So I imagine is most likely going on now. There's a whole bunch of reanalysis hopefully going on of existing data sets against AI algorithms that'll increase confidence, help regulatory systems, and also, of course, probably bring down the insurance costs as those systems progress against falsification models. So I think that we do have to be cautious and yet continue forward.
I think that, you go first.
And I want to add to that, because we're also at a methodological challenge. As we put in predictive tools, we'll also see that we come to the end of what we know, in a way. And there are probably enough smart people to be able to help us to set that right. But what if you start predicting things and people start acting on that? And what if your models keeps on learning? How does this, what people think is acting in this causal relationship, and your model that correlates all kinds of things, and most of it you might not know, also something we need to work on. How do we validate that? How do we govern those systems? And I think that's an important challenge, and I haven't figured it out. And I'm looking forward to meet any people that have.
Yeah. I think that it's a big thing. The trust but verify is a very important thing here, because especially as you get into deep learning, and I think there's a talk later on today about explainable AI. How do you understand how it's come to that decision? So there is a degree which it says, oh, I've seen this correlation here, and I can give you my thinking behind it. But there has to be a step beyond that, because it's not just the decision-making process, it's the ground truth data it worked on. So what was the data it learned from and the data it looked at? Because we've already seen with things like Microsoft Taybot, which is the chatbot that went evil when it got fed the wrong data, or we've seen from Google being fined for manipulating its search engines, that all these algorithms can be tweaked and be manipulated. So how do we know that once something's signed off, that isn't then tweaked afterwards? And that's a much more important question when we have self-learning algorithms that you certify on the Monday morning, and by Monday afternoon they've learned something else and changed their mind. So that's what we're struggling with. I don't think there is an answer. So the FDA are saying they'll come up with something. I think the only thing we can say is have freezes and say, this is the model, it doesn't change until the next update, at which point it gets validated again. But that means you're going to limit the number of updates you can have. So it's going to be big trouble getting to the bottom of that.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Navin. Any other questions? Anyone who, not even a question, would like to just comment on some of the... Yes, I see a hand over there.
Hello, my name is Lily and I'm from Roche. I have a question regarding changes in medical treatment paradigm, even in the scientific or clinical understanding of disease, whether when you're doing this deep machine learning algorithms, whether that already needs to be built in, because I think the way that we operate is that when there's a new treatment paradigm, there are new guidelines that are issued, then we align all of ourselves to the new guidelines and what it recommends. So how do you see that kind of reality of how knowledge is processed and implemented in a clinical setting translated into the machine learning environment?
Thank you.
That comes down to the learning health system. So a learning health system, you effect a change, things happen, you reassess, you put new guidelines in, which affects a change, and you go around. And that cycle, I think there was a study which showed it takes up to about 15 years to happen currently, even for very simple things like hypertensive medication. So the aim for all of this is to bring that cycle, make it much shorter. That's our current cycle. The newer cycle kind of says, rather than causality, we're moving towards association. So if we go down the deep learning thing, we're not going to even say that this has been validated. We will just say there is this all-seeing algorithm that has seen enough data points to say this is true. And so people say, well, that's not going to be there because there's the clinician judgment happening. But at what point are you going to overrule an AI that's seen 1 trillion data points? And if you do, and it's the wrong decision, which lawyer is not going to love that? So there's a whole thing around liability at that point. And there's another issue around de-skilling. So in the same way that airline pilots now, I think there's a general acceptance that their ability to fly an airplane isn't quite as good as it was 20 years ago because they've become more reliant on the autopilot. I think a similar thing could happen there. So it's that funny stage where we go from a human-led system towards a machine-led system, exactly like with self-driving cars and drivers there. We don't know what's going to happen, and it could be a scary time, and we just have to be aware of it.
And, sorry.
We've been through that a number of times. I mean, we have had devices do the same and probably de-skill a large number of us before. So in a way, it's not a new challenge, it's just a different new challenge.
So this is where I can agree with what you say, but so there's two parallels here. So there's a degree, so we always say this around the Industrial Revolution, more jobs came out. Past precedent doesn't always predict the future. So before World War I, there was no World War -1 or 0. So just because it didn't happen before doesn't mean it isn't going to happen now, number one. Number two, and I've completely lost my train of thought there, but it's... yeah.
It's actually a good time to lose your train of thought, because I think we can take one more question, and then we'll move. Yes, the gentleman in front here.
So my name is Jan Sliva, and I have maybe a general remark, because all those algorithms, they work well if you have comparable data over a longer period. And probably in the real case, you just collect incomplete data, learning data, and then you compare them with incomplete real-life data. And I think here a real problem. And then it's another case, changing. Because, technical guys, they always think about, today. But in next year, you will have different possibility of measure things with different granularity, or something that worked before, some devices will be thrown away. So we have a system in constant change. Also data formats, data granularity, data quality, and so on. So, because as long as you say just data, it looks very easy, but it isn't.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you very much. Anyone like to? Perhaps actually I can translate that for Indra. Actually, it goes in line with something I was reading. I think it was in February. You published something that said the three main focus areas for 2018. One was to explore the challenges of machine learning and intelligent technology to policy and regulation. I was curious to find out how that was going.
So I highlighted our code of conduct, but for danger of sounding like a broken record, I think the previous panel talked about it with the FDA and the European Commission, but I think this is a real change that we're seeing in regulation around. I mean, we've talked a lot about medical devices, but I just want to say that algorithmics aren't always about a medical device. They can be about system intelligence or other topics. And what we're trying to do in the UK is, again, I think what everybody's doing is doing a bit of a gap analysis of where are the problems in our regulations. But another thing, and I'm going to, again, sound like a broken record, but is bringing everybody on that journey. So people talked about remote doctors, if you don't know that doctor somewhere hasn't been regulated, so let's talk about a person who hasn't been regulated, we don't even know what regulation means. I mean, ask a general member. Let's walk out this door and go and ask somebody on the street, do you know what regulation means? I'm not sure lots of people even understand that. I know my patients in A&E don't. I don't know if yours do or yours do. They don't have a clue what it means. But, you know, if you say there's a law here or there's a rule here, people start understanding. So it's about changing the language. And I think what a lot of us need to do in this room is start changing our language. I mean, I can't tell you how many words I've heard today that, okay, I'm in the space, so I know about it. And that's one of the things we've got to get our legal teams to start doing as well. And the same in medicine is start changing that language. And then if you become more intelligent customers within the healthcare paradigm, I think you will start seeing more people pick up when things are going wrong. So going back to your question, you know, how do you validate things? Well, actually, if you start understanding that you need to, you start picking it up more.
I think perhaps that will add to the general level of comfort, not only for ourselves as clinicians, but for our patients as well. So thank you so much. I recognize there's some hands. If you don't mind, if we could link up with the panelists after the session at lunch, that would be great. So thank you very much.
Thank you.